cynulleidfa go dda gyda ni bore yma. We have a really good, interesting and big audience for this. And I'm really pleased because the session coming up is going to be a lot of fun. And this is the point at which I hand over to a real pro. And I don't have to chair this session at all. It's going to be absolutely great. I'm just going to lie back and enjoy it. And we have speakers focusing on the maritime history and heritage of Holyhead. So this is the boats session for everybody who's big into their boats. We have Gareth Hughes from Anglesey Antiquarian Society, who's been a really, really supportive person with our project. We've had some wonderful conversations with Gareth, still only over the phone, but really looking forward to actually meeting up with you. Ar Ynys Môn cyn bo hir, gobeithio, Gareth. Gareth has invited a guest, Mr. William Owen Williams, who is a former crew member of the Holyhead mail packet boat. So we're going to get some real on the boat views from him. We have Barry Hillier from Holyhead Maritime Museum, who is a very staunch supporter of the project, and delighted to have a guest from over the Welsh Sea, Richard Cruz from the Leinster Memorial Committee. And at this point now, I hope I can hand over to Gareth and we can unmute all the speakers. And Martin is going to put up some images when Gareth asks for them. Diolch o galon I bawb fyna, ffantastig. Na I daweli nawr.
Bore da I chi gyd, bore da o Caergybi. Gobeithio bod chi gyd yn ddedwydd I gyd allan yn fanna a bod chi'n barod am y sioe sgynnon ni o'n blaenau chi. A diolch I chi am gymryd yr amser I ddod yma I siarad efo ni, a'i wrando ni bore yma. Dwi am drio rhywbeth rwan a dwi'n gobeithio wneith hwn weithio. Ffolch rof go leer o Holyhead, gorama hagaf ac y fe alo har Dublin Port Fest. Mas mwyntir na heren ew o'r art speciality a Holyhead. Be a he Holyhead an hade et hash twrlin dwi'n a linda na thiali gylacha a hwy ar y myrca chomlelu on mochnach ogus on nortan o hwn chsil nws ni'r far a ianw dos fen. Sanwri an cholliat ar y hôn premid stair Holyhead. Agus tis famid nish a fi banch, mor ag Holyhead listair na heheren. I am told by a message that I've received from Ports and Present that there are one or two people on this planet who don't understand Welsh or Irish. And it's hard to believe that that is the case, but we will continue this in the third language, which will be English. But my thanks there to the Taurus project in Dublin, in Belfast, for teaching me how to say the Irish there. Wonderful. The three speakers I will introduce in a second, but I'm going to give you a little bit of history, a boring bit to start off with, just to tell you where we've come from as far as Holyhead is concerned, to give you an idea of the place, give you an idea of how we developed. And I'm going to ask Martin now if you'll give us the first slide, if that's possible, please. Wait until that appears, which will be fairly soon, one hopes. Ah, there it is. That's it. Yes. I'm going to start with Professor Claire Connolly of Clark University. She gave a lecture in Cambridge in 2019, and she mentioned Holyhead twice there. She mentioned Holyhead from a quote from Frank O'Connor, that very perceptive short story writer from Cork. And Frank O'Connor said, "An Irishman's private life begins at Holyhead." Idea that people were either forced to leave Ireland or chose to leave Ireland, but that they'd lived in these close-knit communities. And only when they could ride in Holyhead could they feel that they have the private life. Everybody knew everything about them before that. The second quote, can't be avoided, of course, is James Joyce. Joyce wrote that the shortest way to Tara was via Holyhead. Tara, this mythical, magical hall of the Irish kings, this nirvana people were aiming for. And the only way you could find it, said Joyce, is to leave Ireland, which he did, and to find your own nirvana. And once you'd found it, you could then return, which he never did, of course. So that's, and I'm grateful to Professor Connolly for finding those two quotes for us there. The picture you've got is Holyhead, in case you've doubt it. Slightly changed since the time that picture was taken. But you can see in the very middle there, the harbour is in there. You've got two ships out of the, on the ferry terminal. And if you look to the right of those two ships, you'll see a pier coming out into the sea. The one on the left is a modern construction. There is a pier going out on the right-hand side, and I'll be coming back to that in a second. Where should we start? We'll start with Henry VIII. Why not? Everybody starts with Henry VIII. Henry VIII is, or was, the King of England. And he decided one day that he was going to make himself the King of Ireland. He pronounced that he was now the King of Ireland, which meant that all land in Ireland was crown land. And the Irish chieftains were not happy about this at all. And so what happened was that he bought them off by giving them peerages. Still goes on nowadays, by the way. But he gave them peerages, Marquis of Londonderry and the Earl of Ormond and the Duke of Abercorn and so on. One particular one was the Earl of Tyrone, a very wily Irish person called Con O'Neill. He was made the Earl of Tyrone. And when he died, there was a big dispute between his sons as to who was to be made the Earl of Tyrone. And Shane O'Neill, who laid claim to the earldom, quarrelled with his brothers and quarrelled with almost everybody else, raised an uprising, and in the area of Ulster where he lived, he collected people together and became a force to be reckoned with. He became really the ruler of Ulster, but then had ideas that he could take over the whole of Ireland. And when he started writing to the Holy Roman Emperor and to the King of Spain, London got a bit worried. And so Elizabeth I, who was on the throne by then, sent Henry Sidney with an army to Ireland to sort Shane O'Neill out. Henry Sidney, a very wily politician himself, said, "I'll go across," he said, "but I must have some means of communication with London." He knew very well, you see, that if he did one step wrong, his head would be separated from his body, which wasn't very pleasant. So what happened was that a certain Mr. White was given £300 by the court in London to build and to maintain a bark, which is a sort of sailing vessel, to be based in Holyhead at all times. And the way this worked was, if the court in London wanted to send a message to Henry Sidney, a young man would ride on a horse through the, we now call the home counties, up through the English Midlands. Every time he stopped to rest or stopped overnight, his horse would be tied to a post, and we're getting the word post bringing here. And then the bark, he would arrive in Wales. He had huge problems. They had to go through the Berwyn Mountains, they had to cross the Clwyd, the Dee valleys, they had to cross the Conwy Valley, they had to cross through Eryri, Snowdonia, came to the Menai Straits, had to cross that, crossed Anglesey, had to cross the Lasingwen, and finally arrived in Holyhead. He handed over his satchel to the captain of the bark, and the ship sailed off to Dublin. The messenger would stay in Holyhead, resting, drinking probably, and a few days later, the ship would come back with a report from Henry Sidney as to how the uprising was being dealt with. And so this was the first example of Holyhead being used and being chosen to use to carry mail from one place to another. In the 17th century, there is, when the Protectorate arrived, I've promised for all my friends in Ireland that I would never mention the name of the actual Lord Protector. He is not popular in Ireland. And so I won't mention his name, but he did come there through Holyhead. His army was marched across the North Wales coast to Holyhead, and he crossed over from there. So gradually, as we get into the end of the 17th century, we find that Charles II was aware that sending a little young man on a horse was okay, but if he could have money from people sending their own letters, then that would be a big bonus. And so a post office department became a part of the government. And during the 18th century, we see that growing more and more. The post office wanted to send the letters to Ireland via Chester. Not very popular because Chester kept being silted up with the sands and the silt on the Dee. So passengers on that boat from Chester would find themselves sitting on sandbacks for hours waiting to sail. So people, because Dublin was growing and becoming more popular, people started finding their way to Holyhead, and sea captains in Holyhead would run them across to Ireland on wherries or on packet boats. And we heard mention these already about William Morris. William Morris writes, special treat days is we've had white bread, and the white bread came from Dublin. And he had newspapers, and the newspapers came from Dublin. So we're getting this idea of connections across the Irish Sea here. But at the end, the next slide, please, Martin, if I may. This is William Morris's brother. He drew a map of Holyhead, and you can see the harbour that we saw from the first picture in the middle there. The head, which is the mountain, Monitor, Holyhead on the right-hand side, and nothing else, just really an island in the middle there, and which is called Antiquarian, and some sort of shelter for ships. But by the end of the 18th century, things got a bit uncertain in Ireland. Wolfe Tone raised an uprising, the United Irishmen, and the King George III panicked. William Pitt was ordered to pass a law, which is the Act of Union, and all Irish MPs now had to travel to London because the whole of Ireland was being run from London. But that created problems, because how do you carry 100 Irish MPs across from Dublin to wherever? And that became an argument for the whole of the first half of the 19th century. Some work was done in Holyhead, which included that pier I mentioned in the first picture, and also a graving dock so ships could be repaired. But by the middle of the first quarter of the 19th century, a road has now been built. Telford's wonderful road from London, the Great Holyhead Road, as he called it, from London all the way to Holyhead, which made transport much easier. He finished that road in 1826, and then within 11 years, there was a new invention. And this new invention got people very, very excited. This was a train, an actual railway. And from the mid-1830s onwards, the big argument came, can we run a train to Holyhead, and can that train be used to connect up with ships to go across to Ireland? And of course, the answer was yes, it was. There was possible, and from 1851, we get the whole idea of a mail packet port. Ships, steam-driven, running to a very tight schedule. The ruling was this: you had to be able to leave Euston in London and step off the boat in Dunleary within 12 hours. Anything more than that, then the contract had been broken and fines had to be paid. So we get this idea from 1851 until the early 50s and onwards, steam-driven ships. There were world wars, there were famines in Ireland, there were the Irish Home Rule, and then into Irish independence. And throughout all that, the ships ran from Holyhead. They ran to Dunleary, which was called Kingstown for a long time. They ran to Dublin, to North Wall. They ran to Greenore in County Louth. They ran to Belfast. And it's on that sort of idea, that sort of background, that I'm going to talk to my first speaker this morning, but I'm going to ask for one more picture, if I may, Martin, before we leave this. That was the picture of Holyhead in the 1950s. And really, there is that harbour again. The pier that I mentioned is in the bottom right-hand corner. The graving dock I mentioned is on the left-hand side. And that was how Holyhead looked in the 1950s and really up until the mid-60s. That was the port of Holyhead then, looking very different really from the picture that I showed you at the beginning. So I'm going to ask Martin now to switch off the pictures for a second, and I'm going to introduce my first speaker. I'm going to speak to a man called William Owen Williams. You don't know him, but everybody in Holyhead knows him as Wow. Not just because his initials are William Owen Williams, but because every time you talk to him, you say at the end, wow. So I hope that you will all feel the same after speaking to him. Mr. Williams has spent time all his life really at sea. He started off as a boy in Holyhead. He went deep sea for many years and came back to Holyhead and worked on a number of ships. So, bore da, Mr. Williams, ydych chi yna? Mr. Williams? Dwi ddim yn gweld Mr. Williams. Williams, helo. Da ni'n clywed chi.
Eisiau troi mute off, yma.
Helo, dyna ni.
Helo, sut da chi bore yma?
Gwelo dda.
Da iawn. Dwi am droi i'r Saesneg rwan er mwyn i'r pobol ma ddall be da ni ddweud.
Dyna fo, dim problem.
Okay. Mr. Williams, thank you very much for coming, making all the trouble to come here with us this morning. You started your life at sea on the Sleeve Bloom, I understand.
The Sleeve Bloom in 1995 as a galley boy.
A galley boy?
Yes.
Right.
£3 a week, the wages was.
Okay.
And she actually carried about 600 cattle from Holyhead to North Wall in Dublin.
All right.
And we used to sail first thing in the morning. She also had cargo on board as well. And on the way back, she used to carry horses, race horses, because they didn't have these fancy lorries and everything and car ferries to bring them over. And I remember in the afternoons, they used to let the cattle come all the way down North Wall from the centre of Dublin, from the markets, about 600 of them at a time, just running down the North Wall Road. And we used to take them back to Holyhead there. But as I said, she was a coal-fired ship, and the crew had to bring their own food on board. But the officers, they were paying 1 and 6 a meal for a 3-course meal. And my job as the galley boy with the cook used to send me around collecting the 1 and 6. But the thing was, there was 3 of them. They've all passed away now, and no names mentioned, but they were so tight. On the Monday, the A player would have soup. The B player would have the main course, and C would have the sweet. And then on the Tuesday, the one that had the soup would have the main course on a Tuesday. So instead of getting the 1 and 6 around the cabins looking for them, it was 6pence each from the 3 of them. I had to get 6pence each from the 3 to make the 1 and 6. And if I didn't have it, the cook would half kill me. So that was the story really of the Sleeve Bloom.
Can I ask you one thing about her? You said that these cattle came on. Did some people travel with them on the?
They did. I think there was about 10 of them. They called them bullockmen, they called them, because of the bad weather and to make sure that they didn't fall in the pens. And they used to travel with them and go back then at 3 in the morning on the mail boat, on the passenger boat back. And I remember we were talking the other night, and one of the chaps, the foreman of the bullockman, Liam Brady's father used to play for Arsenal.
Right.
Remember us talking about that the other night?
Yes, I
It came
do.
to me last night. Came to me, Liam Brady's father, and then we used to sail at 6 o'clock at night, and he had to round up the bullockmen from all the pubs in North Wales to get them on board. So we sail on time. Fantastic time, fantastic.
Those race horses must have been worth a lot of money.
They were, and this is a true story, that we had one chap, he was one of the stokers. He used to bet heavy on the horses, and he had a certain winner. And on the way back, we carried the poor old horse back. He lost. And this chap, he was going to kill the horse if he could have got a hold of it, because he lost his week's wages or something. And the poor horse, we had to... Oh, dear.
Great stuff. Right. After being on the Sleeve Bloom, you went deep sea, and we know you went on Shell tankers and on Eagle. We won't go into that. I know you've got stories about that as well.
Yeah.
You came back to Holyhead to work on the mail boats.
Well, I came back from deep. What I was trying to do was, for the summer, I would try and get a job in Holyhead, and the winter I go away for months at a time to the hot weather, South America and wherever. Anyway, I came to Holyhead, and I managed to get a job, a seasonal job for the summer it was, and I was lucky enough. I got kept on. And I spent about 2 years on the Princess boat, and she was sort of the third ship to the Cambria and the Hibernia. Especially in the summer, there was passengers getting left behind in Dunleary. So they used to send the Princess Maud out, to bring back all the extra people that was left behind. But she was a terrible sea ship. Even today, I go back to Ireland once or twice a year, and I see old friends, and they still talk about the Princess Maud. Oh, she didn't have roll. But there was something, I can't remember the poem now, but there was something like about the Princess Maud. She sailed around the stack, and the passengers were screaming, "Will we ever get back?" Sort of thing. Well, I don't remember the whole poem, right? But
that's wonderful. Yeah,
that's great. Yes,
so,
yeah.
The train would come in with mail bags. Did that how it worked?
Yes.
How did they get the mail bags onto the?
All the porters would carry it on their backs,
All right.
Like I say, there'd be about 30 of them, and that's and it was the same in Dunleary as well. They weren't put in nets and put down the hold. They were, carried on their backs. The mail boats. The mail bags.
Mail bags.
Yeah.
Good grief. So, did you work on the Hibernia and the Princess Maud?
They used to say that the Princess Maud was the naughty boy's ship. If you did something wrong on the Hibernia or Cambria, you were put on the Princess Maud. That's a punishment. But I got promoted. I got put then on the Hibernia.
Right. So you must have been a good boy then.
I must have been. And anyway, I was put on the Hibernia, and as I say, I had a great time there. We used to sail at 3 in the morning, get to Dunleary at 7, and sail at 8:45 back to Holyhead, get in at midnight. But in the summer, we used to do what we call double trips. She would leave Holyhead 3 in the morning, get to Dunleary at 7, and sail again at 9 o'clock, back to Holyhead midday, and then back out again at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then back midnight to Holyhead.
Wow. Well, that was quite a heavy...
it was, yeah. But we were young then, plenty of Guinness as well, so, it didn't affect us.
Can I ask, I just cut it across. Martin, can we put on a picture of those ships, please? The next slides. That's it. Can you see that, Mr. Williams?
That's the sleeve loom, yes.
That's the sleeve loom.
You can see she was a coal fire because see all the smoke coming out.
That's it. Yes, yes, yeah. Doesn't look like you could carry 600 cows on that. Doesn't look like a big ship.
No, but it really did, you know. It really did, yeah.
And the next one, please, Martin. There we are. There's the Hibernia.
There's the Hibernia, yes.
She was a good ship. And then, that's your old friend.
The old Princess Maud.
She's actually rolling around.
She's rolling in the harbour there, look. Well, I still get seasick now looking at her.
Great stuff. Yeah. And can I just, before we get on to this one, the Britannia Bridge went on fire in 1970. 1970. What happened then? Did the Hibernia stay in Holyhead or did she move?
No, the Cambria and the Hibernia, we moved to Heysham, but we came in at midnight and because it was over the tannoy and everything, the bridge was on fire. So there was a big panic. I think there was about 800 passengers and they all wanted to go to places like Birmingham, London, wherever. Well, they had to find buses now because they couldn't, you know, they couldn't get over the railway bridge, as I would call it, in Menai Bridge. And then they panicked again now about the Hibernia and Cambria. Where are we going to go? Some said Fishguard and then some said Heysham. Anyway, we landed up in Heysham. At the end, we had 2 years there. And I have to be honest, a fantastic 2 years there as well. We used to work 3 weeks on in the winter and a week off. And in the summer, because we did double trips there as well. It was a 9-hour passage from Heysham to Dunleary. And in the summer, you were doing that twice a day, you know, two trips, 4 crossings a day and for a week. And that was hard going.
I'm sure, yes. But then the picture we've got here, this is the St. Cubby. And this is the change now, isn't it?
This is the
instead
change,
of
yes.
Just passengers and cargo and cattle.
Yeah.
What did this ship carry?
She carried 28 lorries, or we used to call them drops. You know, the lorries used to come on and then just drop the containers on deck. There were 28 of them, and then we carried 12 lorry drivers. That's all she was allowed to carry with insurance or something.
Right.
So the other lorry drivers would come over on the Hibernia, the Cambria, or I think it was the St. Columba then, and pick up their things in Dunleary. She was a lovely ship as well.
That's it. So there was a change now from the old mail packet boats to the idea that lorries and the things have been carried in a different way. Yes. Can I have the next slide, please, Martin? And then you landed up on the ship. This is the Rhodri Mawr.
The Rhodri Mawr. And there was 2 of them, the Rhodri Mawr and Brian Brew. I was the relief between the 2 of them. And I have to say, I've been on about 30 ships in my life and crews from all over the world. But on here, I've never seen such a happy ship. We were one big family, all Welsh speakers. Nothing against the English language, but our first language it was, even from the captain down. And I think I had a couple of years on there.
And what did she carry, Mr. Williams?
She carried just containers, 40-foot containers on deck. Something like, not as big. I think this one at 19, she carried 2,000, I think it was 7,000 thingy she carried. And it was 7,000. So I haven't got, I think it was in a year we carried in. She ran to Dublin one day, back to Holyhead, and then Belfast then the next sort of trip. Alternative like that, an alternative to the Brian Brew.
Right, so you've got experience of sailing into Dunleary. You've sailed into
no, sorry, yes.
And you sailed into Belfast as well.
Belfast as well, yes. Dublin and Belfast.
So you've got experience of all these ports.
And Fishguard, yeah, Fishguard
and the
as well.
change that has taken place from the old steamships to, more modern ships in that sense, and the types of cargo that we've carried.
Yeah.
Dwi am stopio chi fanna. Diolch o galon I chi am gymryd rhan yma. Thank you very much. We've really enjoyed it, and I'm certain that you've got lots more stories. You can tell them next time about the dog and the soldiers in Belfast.
Oh, bidwch a
We won't say that one now. We'll keep that one.
Diolch yn fawr I chi. Diolch. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to change now and go to Barry Hillier, who has really made his name and is an expert on all things heritage in Holyhead. He's the secretary of the Holyhead Maritime Museum, the must place. If you are in Holyhead at any time, you must visit the Maritime Museum. It is an absolute treasure of a place. And certainly Barry is somebody who's worked there and helped there and arranged and done all the work there for a long time. Barry, are you there with us? We can ask Barry to
Yes, I'm here.
There we are.
Yeah. Thank you for that introduction. Half of this is unfortunately not true, but then
the Maritime Museum has been described, Barry, as the repository of the port's memory. Can you tell us something about the background of the museum? Where is it? When is it open? Who works there? And perhaps some of the idea of the plans for the future of the museum.
Okay, if I could share my screen now, and maybe I can tell the story that way. Can everybody see that?
Yeah, yes, we're seeing you.
Right, this is my attempt to inform people about the Holyhead's maritime and heritage, and obviously I haven't got enough time to cover everything, but I hope that we can give people a bit of a taste of Holyhead's background. Gareth has already given us good background there, and Mr. Williams's tales. Well, again, you could listen to them all day long. But I'll see what I can help. Right, the museum. Well, this is where we are, in case people don't know. I could think, as a maritime museum, we couldn't be closer to the sea, as you can realize. We are in an old lifeboat house built in the mid-1850s, and we claim it's the oldest in Wales, so nobody's challenged us up to yet. So we'll keep on claiming that. We've been there since about 1998. The museum actually started up in the town as in a disused church from about 1986 onwards. And the name of John Cave has already been mentioned earlier on, and it was John and others at that time who put in a lot of efforts to establish a museum, in Maritime Museum in Holyhead. And it was his personal enthusiasm and energy that made it actually happen. But going back to the museum where it is, we are actually in two parts there. We have the main museum in the old lifeboat house, but we also, and that grey building you see just to the side of it, more to the right of the building, you can see the roof of it is actually a Second World War air raid shelter. So we occupy both buildings. The main museum covers mostly the maritime history of the town. The air raid shelter, quite aptly, we've turned into a war museum, telling the story of Holyhead at war mostly through the First and the Second World War. And we packed both buildings with interesting artifacts, and I think visitors do enjoy coming to see us. They enjoy interacting with the guides that we have. The museum is totally volunteer run. We have, well, up to when COVID hit us, we had close to 50 volunteers. We're not quite sure how many we got at the moment. We're trying to reform, but we're totally volunteer led. We have a trustee group of 11 which manage the museum, and it is the enthusiasm, the interest of all our volunteers there that keeps the museum running. We do enjoy interacting with visitors. We get through a summer season. We open generally about Easter and we close at the end of October. And during that season, we can see up to 5,000 people. Most of them are coming to Anglesey, the area, and come here and spend time looking around Anglesey and looking around Ernest Cubby. And we think, you know, we make a decent contribution to the tourism of the area and also to you know, the economy of the local area as well. We have up over the last few years had many more cruise ships coming to the town, and that's good to hear from Ivan that we're going to have at least 20 plus ships this year. Well, so we're looking forward to maybe our visitors will come and see us again from them. But as far as our short-term plans are, well, we at the moment are sorting ourselves out to open in a few weeks' time. We're having to make the museum as safe as possible in terms of visits relating to COVID and keeping people safe. Our most important asset, I think, is our volunteers. They're all of a certain age, as you can guess from looking at me, and you want to make sure they're as safe as the visitors that come there. So at the moment, we're setting up things. We are familiarizing our volunteers with the arrangements that we're having to make there. And as I said, we hope to open up shortly and welcome people again. We may have to limit things, but you know, we're going to play. Well, our aim really is to get going again and see what we can do and regroup again, hopefully for next year. In the long term, I think you might have gathered that when you see the next few pictures that we're a pretty full museum in terms of artifacts. And in fact, we have in storage elsewhere probably enough artifacts for another museum of the same size. We've always had plans to expand the museum, and we're hoping that we can do that. And in fact, we are, as a trustee group at the moment, working hard to prepare a business plan, a project plan that we can put together and then look for funding to possibly at least double the size of the museum. You can see to the right of the main building there, a large mound of rock. And if we were to expand, it's into that direction. So you can see the physical difficulty that might be ahead of us. So if I can move on to the next slide, give you another view of the museum. And this is the front of the museum and the entrance. This was taken during a festival time at Holyhead. But more importantly, I want to draw your attention to what lies beyond the museum, and that's the great breakwater, and with the lighthouse at the end of it. It's not straight, as you can see there, it's actually in an S shape, and it was completed in 1872, and it created a really imaginative and large harbour of refuge for sailing ships at that time. Now things have moved on, and you can see behind the museum there a few pleasure crafts, and during the summer months there are a lot more craft there. So you know, Holyhead has turned, this area of Holyhead has turned from providing shelter for possibly hundreds of sailing ships sailing the Irish Sea to a place where people come and with their sailing vessels now for more leisure activities. Move again, just to give you an idea of what's inside the museum. We are, well, we count ourselves and we look upon ourselves as the guardians of Holyhead's maritime heritage. And this is a general view inside the museum. You can see that it's very well packed. In fact, visitors who come there and step inside the museum, they think they've just stepped inside the TARDIS. You know, they think, how do we get all this stuff in such a small building? Well, that's one of the benefits of our arrangements there. There's plenty for people to see, but it does give us some problems when we come to looking at opening up again under the present situation. We have many treasures in the museum. We have stories of bravery, of wrecks and rescues, as you can imagine. And there's no maritime museum, I think, in the country that doesn't rely on tragedy to tell its main stories. This is a gold medal, RNLI gold medal, issued to William Owen coxswain of Holyhead Lifeboat in 1908. There aren't too many of these about on view in museums, and we tell the story of William Owen's as a coxswain of the lifeboat the Duke of Northumberland, when it went to the rescue of the SS Harold just off South Stack in a howling hurricane, actually. And this is the model of the lifeboats that he was in charge of. This is the Duke of Northumberland. This is one of the first, if not the first, powered lifeboats serving the RNLI, and it had a unique propulsion system. It actually operated water pumps, throwing water into the bow and shooting it out at the stern, which give it propulsion. No propeller to tangle with ship's rigging, as you can see. And coxswain Owen and his crew of 10 managed to save the lives of 9 seamen off the SS Harold in 1908. The model you see here is one of many which we have in the museum, and we are indebted to the family of the late Les Jones, who was a superb model maker. And we are happy now to continue to be able to display his models in our museum.
Can I just cut across you there, Barry? Can I cut across you just for a second? I'm aware of the time. And, you know, there's so much wonderful stuff there that we'd all like to see. But I'd like to sort of just push you on just one straight, if possible. You've talked about a lot of these with tragedies, the tragedy of the lifeboat, the tragedy of happening, the ship sinking and so on. I would like to bring you to the idea of the Leinster and this very special story that you've got about your family and something that happened there. And I think people would like to hear that, if possible. I'm sorry to cut across you in that way.
No, that's fine, guys. I can see that we're a bit short of time. I'll push forward through these slides a little bit if you can catch your eye on a few things that you might see when you come to the museum. But we are, as Gareth said, much involved in commemorations that Holyhead have participated in over the past. This is the view of the cenotaph in 1923 when the cenotaph, the war memorial there, was unveiled to those who lost their lives in the First World War. But as Gareth said, this is the Leinster. I know Richard Cruz will be talking about this a little bit later, but this is a photo of a painting we have at the museum of the Leinster in 1909. Beautiful ship, as you can see. But what I want to talk about, if we can skim through a lot of this, but just to link through the museum that we have 5 members in the museum who lost grandfathers in the Leinster. In 2018, we organised a commemoration event for the 100 years of the loss of the Leinster. Church service, we got 100 present-day relatives of those that were lost on the Leinster. We had our events at the cenotaph. We involved the school children, and they laid memorial crosses for those lost. But this is the story, I think, that Gareth alludes to. And this is the story of 2 Holyhead seamen of the Leinster. They were of a similar age. Richard Williams, as you see in this photograph there, is in the uniform of the boatswain of the City of Dublin Steam Packet Company. Photograph taken at Southampton when he'd just been promoted to boatswain, and he served then on the RMS Connaught, the sister ship of the Leinster. And the Connaught, unfortunately, was torpedoed in March 1917. The ship was lost, only 3 lives were lost, but it meant the crew had to be displaced onto other ships. So he ended up in October 10th, 1918, as a seaman on board the Leinster. He'd lost his position as boatswain. He had to downgrade to that of a seaman. Now, the gentleman on the right-hand side in the Royal Naval uniform is Evan Rollins. This is my wife's grandfather. Now, they were both on the Leinster at the same time. Evan Rollins was one of 3 gunners on the Leinster. He was in the Royal Naval Reserve. He'd been trained as a gunner on HMS Caroline, which now is in Belfast. And actually, he then served on Argentinian cargo ships bringing bully beef to Britain, and then he transferred to the ships of the City of Dublin Steam Packet Company and he took up the position of gunner there. Now, unfortunately, during the tragedy of the Leinster, Richard Williams lost his life. Evan Rollins survived, and Evan Rollins made his way back to Holyhead immediately after the disaster. The Ulster, the RMS Ulster, the other sister ship of the Leinster, crossed the Leinster just before the tragedy and docked at Dunleary, and we believe that Evan Rollins then took passage back to Holyhead, and he was possibly one of the first people to arrive back in Holyhead, bringing the news, and the word spread around Holyhead of the tragedy, obviously, and people were very anxious about their relatives, their husbands, and their brothers and sisters and such. And Evan Rollins, who lived in 13 Wells Street, settled back home, and very soon afterwards there came a knock on the door, and standing outside there was the son of Richard Williams, who lived in Rock Street, Millbank, Holyhead. Knocking on the door, he'd been sent by his mother to ask about was there any word of Richard. These two men would have known each other well, and who answered the door was the daughter of Evan Rollins, Dorothy, known as Dora to the family. And she invited young Richard Williams in. Dora was 11, Richard was 13, and he came in to ask about his father, and you can imagine, not good news. Anyway, out of this tragedy, something good did happen. And this is the story in the family anyway. But this is the first time that Dora and Richard met as young, coming up to teenage years. Their friendship blossomed, their love blossomed, and eventually they got married. And they then settled in Holyhead and had a daughter, Beryl. And out of all this, as you can see, a tragedy, there is something good that came out of it. There was a love story that came out of it, and there was another generation formed out of it. I mentioned Beryl. Well, Beryl, you see, ended up with two grandfathers on the Leinster. One survived and one was lost. And I'd just like to finish, and thank you very much for giving us the opportunity here, showing this. When we had the commemoration, this handmade wreath was laid at the cenotaph. We never found out who laid it there, but you can see the measure of the remembrance even 100 years later for that sort of tragedy in Holyhead. And I'd like to finish there. Thank you.
Oh, Barry, that was wonderful. Thank you very much, and for sharing so much of your own story and the story of the museum and the commemorations, which leads us neatly and excellently to our third speaker, Mr. Richard Cruz, who's in Dunleary. Good morning, Richard. How are you this morning?
Hello, good morning. Siw mai bore da Cubby.
Siwmai, bore da, Caergybi, siwmai, bore da, Dunleary. Thank you very much.
Good morning from Dunleary. We are coming to you from the Rochestown Lodge Hotel.
Right.
With my comrades, David Cotter and Jenny Wang.
Excellent. Well, welcome to them as well.
I would just like to say many thanks for the invitation to be here today to Sarah and Anne-Marie. I'd also like to thank Gareth for facilitating this event today.
It's great to have you with us.
A few words of introduction, if I may, please.
Yes, please.
I first got to know Holyhead in 1968 when my father died. 2 weeks after that event, after my father died, my mother brought me to Holyhead on the mail boat MV Cambria. This was my first trip to Holyhead, and it always stood in my mind as the people of Holyhead were so kind. From that first day in Holyhead, I've travelled frequently to the port every year from that date. My destination was always Holyhead. after that first trip on the mail boat, I spent the first few years of my youth working on the Carlisle Pier
Ah, right.
for Irish Rail, who worked in the pier in conjunction with British Railways in the late 1960s and most of the 1970s. In 2018, I was on the committee for the Leinster Centenary in Dunleary for the 100 years. I'm also a member of the Dunleary Holyhead Link, and I'd like to pay tribute to John Cave and J.V. Owen, who have deceased from that organisation. And at the present moment, I'm chairman of the Leinster Memorial Committee in Dunleary. I just want to thank you for letting me have that introduction.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Richard. Can I just expand on that? You say that you're still a member of the Leinster Memorial Committee. Are you planning something in the future as far as the Leinster is concerned?
The Leinster Memorial Committee have been established since the centenary of the event took place in 2018. Yes. The Leinster Memorial Committee proposed to erect a new memorial at the two entrances to the Carlisle Pier, which has historical significance. The RMS Leinster Memorial Committee want to embrace a proper memorial which honour those who died and survived, which will be fitting testament into the future. It is hoped that the anchor, which was donated by the late Des Brannigan, will be moved to the new location and will be incorporated in a memorial in the Carlisle Pier to a planting scheme representing the many countries around the world where the people came from. The different trees will be planted from the countries they came from: Wales, Ireland, England, Scotland, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, United States. The late Des Brannigan, who donated the anchor, wished that those aboard the ship should be named at some point. So our new Leinster Memorial Committee are looking for a site, and at the moment we have problems with Dunleary Rathdown County Council because they refuse to meet us and they refuse to give us a site.
Oh.
And the site we're looking for is the entrance of the Carlisle Pier. We would look for support on our aims in order to have this Leinster Memorial to honour all those who died, named on all those who died or were on board in any way on the RMS Leinster. During the 100 years anniversary, there was a big vibrancy in Dunleary as well as Holyhead. And the RMS Leinster Committee hope that citizens of Dunleary and Holyhead will embrace and welcome this new designed memorial as a feature of remembrance and commemoration. We have tried to communicate with town councillors in Dunleary, Rathdown County Council, and with our TDs. It has been submitted by our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Simon Coveney, and the Welsh Assembly under the link-up of the new document that the new memorial for the RMS Leinster in Dunleary should be built.
Oh, that's excellent.
If we do get the site, we've no problem with funding, as that is not an issue.
Oh, that's excellent.
Memorial, which should be built, ought to be built, should be built, and we need support from all over these countries, especially Wales and Holyhead. So that's, thank you, Gareth. That's what I have to say about the Leinster.
That's it. That's really good news.
Thank you.
We heard earlier Julie Merriman, the artist, saying that a lot of the buildings on the Carlisle Pier have been demolished, and that there is a big car park there. Is this where you want to place the memorial?
it has been suggested that the memorial will be at the entrance to the Carlisle Pier.
I
It
see.
encompass a garden which will have Pacific plants.
Excellent.
Encompass the anchor will also be what's the word? I lost the word. The anchor will be encompassed within.
I see, yes.
We did have events on the Leinster. We brought out a book, The Last Voyage of the Leinster.
I know
That's a
it,
complete
yes.
sellout now. You can't get it. You might get it on eBay for €100 or £100 sterling. Can I just refer to Owen William, the captain of the mailboat?
Well, he wasn't the captain, but yes, he was a seaman on the mailboats, yes.
Well, when I worked on the harbour in Dunleary, there was a big difference between Dunleary and Holyhead, is that Holyhead was controlled by British Railways.
Yes.
Dunleary was controlled by British Rail, but they had an Irish railway porter working side by side.
I
with
see.
the British Rail porter. And as a result, when the mail bags were brought off the ship by the British Rail porter, there was duplication.
I see.
And the Irish railway porter, the British Rail porter, could not put the mail bags on the train. And it was only the Irish porter that was allowed to put the mail bags on the train.
Oh my goodness.
So there was duplication.
I see.
So there was 2,000 bags off the mailboat
Yeah.
of post. Now my job was with others. We were called CIE, Chorus Umper Éireann.
Yes.
We ran the railway to the pier at the Carlisle. And I just want to say that on the sailing, on the overcrowding of the ship, it always happened on a Friday.
Right.
In July and August.
Yeah.
And there was always 200 people left behind.
Oh.
You had to have 200, 300 left behind. So
Yes.
another ship could come in and take them away. But for those who, some people would have a sailing ticket up their sleeve. You see, the travel agencies could sell as many tickets as they liked
Yes.
to go on the ship. But when you arrived at Dunleary, you had to meet, only the British Rail porter could give you the sailing control ticket.
I see.
And he'd buy 10 of those extra for Friday night.
I see.
And when the train arrived, he had it up his sleeve. So I just want to say my experience on the ship. I went on the ship during when the Avalon hit the pier in Holyhead.
Yes.
I was stuck for 36 hours in Hurricane Charlie, I think it was, in 1986.
Good grief.
But the best part of my trips to Holyhead was the duty-free booze trip.
Ah, which
The
are
duty-free
restarting,
booze
I
stock up
understand.
trip. I couldn't understand when the duty-free started that we were all member states of, well, you're not in the EU now, you're Brexit,
No, no.
but we were all in the EU
Yes.
and we had duty-free. I
That's-
couldn't understand it. But in Dunleary, British Railways and then Sealink and whatever, they offered a duty-free trip with a free bottle of booze.
Ah, right.
So the first trip operated with a free bottle of booze. So then they said you could double the booze after a few years. There was a double booze trip. You could get 2 bottles of booze and you could carry the bottles with you. So on the second trip, not only could you buy spirit, but you could buy 1 bottle of spirit, but you could buy, say, 4 bottles of wine. But then on the second trip, you got 2 bottles of spirit and 8 bottles of wine. So when I went with other people, with 4 people,
Yes.
that would be 16 bottles of wine,
My
16
goodness.
back. So I'd be able to carry 32 bottles of wine and 8 bottles of whiskey. So then the beer, you had to have a crate of beer
That's it.
and you had to have a trolley with the beer.
Of
And
course.
that was stocked up from the floor to the ceiling. And then you had to have a van in Dunleary to meet you. with all the booze. So then the Irish government of the time decided no more duty free.
That's it.
So what does Richard Cruise do in Dún Laoghaire? He wants duty free. There's people looking for duty free.
Yes.
So you had to be out of the country now for 48 hours.
Ah, right. Yes.
This was a real snag.
Yeah.
So I got 4 people. So we brought a small bag over to Holyhead and it made into a big bag for the return trip.
I see.
With clothes in it and a toothbrush and a wash bag. And the only point I was terrified was the customs in Dún Laoghaire coming back.
See.
Because I had my 4 bottles of booze, my 16 bottles of wine. And the customs officer said to me, they saw me go out in the morning.
Yeah.
At 9 o'clock. I was back there again at 6. And he said, how long have you been away? And I said, I've been away for 48 hours.
Right.
And I had 2 little boys with me.
Yeah.
And they were 7 years of age. And I said to them, now, I have a bit of a problem. Now, I said, we're on a day trip. Now, we're coming back. Now, you've got to stay away for 48 hours.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm in big trouble. I'm going to be in real big trouble if you say that. And they said, why? But we're on a day trip. And the passengers who came over on the day trip said to me, what's that man doing with you putting clothes in the bag?
Yeah.
They said, he has to tell the customs we're on a day, we're out for 48 hours. So now I'm going to get caught through customs. So when it came to customs, he searched the bags.
I see.
He never found the hidden bottle of booze.
Right.
48-hour trip. I nearly got caught, but I didn't.
We're excellent.
So anyway,
that's wonderful.
one
I'm going to have to
story
stop you there.
That you could only buy one article at that time for £53.
That's it.
And
Look, Richard, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to stop you. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to stop you there, Richard.
So there we go.
Yeah, I'm going to stop you there because those are wonderful. And the tradition of the bullock men that Mr. Williams talked about is carried on. So we're pleased about that. To Mr. Williams, to Mr. Barry Hillier, and to Mr. Richard Cruise, I can only say, diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much indeed. And I pass you back. Dwi'n pasio chi nôl rwan I Mary Ann Constantine. Thank you very much indeed from Holyhead.
Diolch Gareth, o'n nhw'n sesiwn hynod ddiddorol ac hoffwn ni bod gyda ni amser just east fan hyn a siarad am beth really. O'n I just mynd I weid, I was just going to say, Martin and I are going to hang on after 1 o'clock and we're just going to keep our cameras on, and anybody that just wants to stay and have a bit of a chin wag, you're welcome to come back and have a chat with us at the end of the session. But for now, we're going to stick to our timetable so that people can get their lunch. And we're going to move on to meet a new speaker, who is again somebody who's given us an awful lot to the project already. And I like to think of him as a kind of one-man Ports Past and Present, because he connects through his family, Wales and Ireland. Stephen Mcgee, are you with us in the audience there?
I am, I'm here, yes. Hello,
lovely,
hello.
Lovely to see you. Prynawn da, yeah. What a fantastic session that was. And in a sense, what you're doing now is contributing to the strand that we've just discussed with the Leinster and the rest of it. You've already, and people need to know this, you've already done us a wonderful podcast for Ports Past and Present, and you can hear Stephen talking a lot about his family, and cattle feature widely, and also surprisingly alcohol features as well. So Stephen, do you just want to tell us a little bit about how you got connected to the project and what the particular things are in it that interest you?
Okay. Well, what I've done to save drifting off, because I'm good at drifting off, I've got a 5 minutes, and if you're happy to listen for 5 minutes.
Lovely, yeah, that'll be brilliant.
I've got my reading glasses on. Here I go. It's a Campbell soup version of an Irish family's experience of living in Holyhead. So my ancestors came to Holyhead in the first half of the 1800s, Mcgees and Campbells. They came like others because Holyhead at that time was a boom town. The breakwater was being built. the railways, the port, the bridges. It was a place where you could make a lot of money and lose a lot of money. We moved into Old Post Road, which is directly opposite the main entrance to the cattle yard. And we had a pub, the Foresters Arms, and next door we had a temperance house. So as typical Irish, we had a foot in both camps. We were cattle dealers, butchers, farmers, hospitality providers, shop owners, and this is a good Irish strand. We've got loads and loads of teachers. There's between about 15 to 18 teachers along the strand of the family. My son's a teacher, my sister's a teacher, my father's sisters were teachers, so there's teachers all the way through. We were much part of a much bigger Irish community. The Keegans, Flanagans, Walshes, Bogues, Dolans, O'Briens, O'Neills, Sullivans, Kennedys, Walshes, Kinderlands. And lots more, and apologies if I haven't mentioned them. I've been around the Catholic graveyard, and it's amazing the range of surnames that are there. And they generally all had, unbelievably, very large families. I can't think why, but we did. One of those little things. As a family, we were involved with several wars. The earliest was the Boer War, where Nathaniel Joseph Campbell, who was residing in the Foresters, fought in the Boer War. And when he came home from the war, when he got off the train in Holyhead Station, he could see a massive bonfire in the Kingsland area. And as he walked down the road with his kit pack on his back, the whole family and street were out there to celebrate his return, and the bonfire was him. And as a little boy in the pub, I found his old white pith helmet, and I used to play with it on my head. And the same chap, he ran the Foresters in the early 1900s, and in 1914, with the outbreak of the war, he rejoined the Royal Navy, and he was on HMS Her Majesty's hospital ship Anglia when it was sunk with, it had 200 soldiers in cots on board in the Irish Sea. And unfortunately, he drowned trying to save a nurse from drowning, and he drowned in the process. So that's the connection to the Foresters. The pub had many notable visitors. Two of interest was Admiral Stevens, who was the chief surgeon of the Royal Navy, and he lived in Porther Post, which is between Trevor Bay and Porthdavach. His house backed onto the golf course, and every evening he'd walk across the golf course to Kingsland to the Foresters Arms to have his pink gin before he started his world tour of Holyhead. At the end of the night, he'd finish with another pink gin in the Foresters and then tootle on across the golf club back to his house. One particular night, he didn't come home, and search parties were sent out for him, and they were out for hours. And in the early hours of the morning, they found him in the fourth bunker of the green on the fourth hole at the back of his house. He was still alive, I might add, but he obviously had a very good night. Another famous person used to call was Hugh Griffis, the Oscar-winning actor, who got his Oscar for Ben-Hur. His relative Robin ran the Trowther Bay post office. He was a regular. He used to park his big Rolls Royce with big chromed round headlights outside the Foresters, and he'd smoke his King Edward cigar while drinking a double brandy, retelling stories of old. And he was a very, very funny man, and a very, very down-to-earth man, and a typical Welshman, full of trouble in the interesting sense. The last licensee was my Auntie Margaret. She's still alive now. She left the pub in 1978. She went on a licensed victualler's holiday on the QE2 from North Wales, and she met a Cornish farmer, so she ended up down in Cornwall. The family moved on from there, and we had a big involvement in the port. A lot of my brothers, my father were marine engineers. My aunties worked there with the secretary to the port manager. And the present day family is my wife, Elaine, whose parents are Irish, both from Northern Ireland. And we sort of met. I was digging a hole in Holyhead, doing my job, hit the electric cable outside the house, burnt my hair, and she came out with a cup of tea sent by her mother, and that's how we met. And my wife is a teacher as well, so that's another story for another day. We've got 5 boys. Paul, he's 27, Matthew, 23, James, 18, Sean, 15, I'm running out of names. Daniel 12. The music came from, we sent them to Ysgol Cymraeg Morrison, which is the Welsh school in Holyhead. We're Catholics. I went to St Mary's School, which is an excellent school, but we decided that Welsh was important. So we still went down the Catholic religious route. They've all had the Holy Communions, but they learned Welsh in Morriswyn. That's where they were brought into the Eisteddfod, music, dansio gwering, which is folk dancing. Paul brought a form home,
6 years old.
about 6 years old, to play an instrument. We said guitar. He went to school, and the very wise headmistress, who was a fantastic lady, Mrs. Rhian Williams, said, Paul, you've ticked guitar. Is that what you want to play? Nah, Mrs. Williams, dwi'n isio chwarae fiddle. And when she asked him to explain why, Elaine's father had a fiddle under the stairs, which was in bits. That was his grandma's. And she used to play all over Northern Ireland in the playhouses and old black and white cinemas and in quartets, etc. And that's the violin Paul plays now. It's not worth a fortune, but the family thought it was. When he was left it in the will, they all thought we were going to be rich. But it just cost us hundreds and hundreds of pounds to repair. But that's a story for another day. So Paul took on the violin. The other 4 boys followed him. So they've all got grades between 6 and 8. They all took on different instruments after then: drums, Irish whistle, bass guitar, mandolin. It goes on and goes on. They've played together for 7 years. They've done a lot for the Maritime Museum, the Royal British Legion, Holyhead Town Council. We've been very, very lucky and fortunate to play in lots of memorials like the Lannister, Connemara, Retriever, Tara, Anglia, the jigs at the US Liberator that crashed into Holyhead Mountain. We've done lots of at the cenotaph. We're all very connected to our history. We love history. We love being involved, and we thank everybody very much for including us. And it's a great honour. And I didn't realise when we played for the HMHS Anglia Memorial that one of my direct relatives perished on it. So you've helped me learn more about the history in me investigating for this today. So the organisers of the Leinster asked Paul, would the boys sing a song? Paul said to Barry, would you like me to try and write a song? And in the end, he actually wrote 2 songs, one a few weeks before, and then 2 nights before he decided it wasn't good enough. So 2 nights before he wrote another song. They learned it the following day. They played it in the ceremony. You're going to hear it now after me, which it was recorded a couple of years ago. The words are very moving. I think it's showing war from different perspectives. And at the end of the service in St. Cubby's, which was a wonderful service, the church was packed. It was very emotional, and it was a great experience to be involved in. We were surprised. We had half a dozen relatives, separate relatives, who came up to us afterwards, and they said, could we just have the words of the song, because it had a meaning for them in it. So I'm introducing you to the boys singing RMS Leinster song. Matthew's not there because he was in university at the time, but there's 4 of them there, and it's a couple of years ago, so I hope you enjoy it. And thank you very, very much, Diolch yn fawr iawn, for having me today, and I hope you've enjoyed my little potted history.
Diolch yn fawr, Stephen, and thank you to you all in the family. And we really wanted this song to be part of the morning because a lot of what we're about as a project is how do the creative arts commemorate heritage? How do we remember our past through different media? And Martin now, our whiz kid, is going to be playing the video of the Mcgee brothers singing the Ballad of the Leinster. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi.
Years ago in the Irish Sea, a torpedo struck and it caused tragedy. People maimed and wounded, 560 died. If you've never heard pain, hear the children cry. mothers, for their fathers, for their brothers, for their sisters, for their mothers, for their fathers, for their brothers, for their sisters. Biggest loss of life in the Irish Sea. All this pain caused by 1, 2, 3. Or was it the Kaiser that botched the hand? 2 captains following orders, what would we have done? Finger on the trigger, let do the same to us. That ship helps the enemy, don't feel disgust. For our country lads, one big push. This war will be the last and all the killing will stay in the past. Hundred years on, we gather round. I remember the 560 who drowned. Ram and his crew, they were people too. And a watery grave they share with no statue. Hear the children cry for their mothers, for their fathers, for their brothers, for their sisters, for their mothers, for their fathers, for their brothers, for their sisters.
Well, on that beautiful note, thank you again, Stephen and the family, for sharing that with us. Really wonderful song. And
Thank you.
another way of remembering that, you know, history happens to everybody on both sides of any war. Diolch o galon. We're going to move forward now to Martin, and please stick around because we now have interviews with 2 astonishingly interesting people who've been working for the project. Margaret Pendraw and Julie Brownson are 2 of our artists, and Martin is going to be talking you through their work with them. So croeso mawr I chi gyd. Diolch o galon I bawb sydd 'di siarad bore 'ma.
Okay, I'm going to press straight on now with another creative response to the lens. This is just a short excerpt of a monologue written by Julian Brownson, which again is available now on our website, but this is just a very short section, and then we'll meet Julian.
It was like a bolt of thunder hit the port side of the ship, the left side, and I fell right down onto my knees. It's like a tremendous explosion, and I felt it rippling below us in the lower decks, right through to the starboard side. You know, the first thing I did was look up to the roof. We had this beautiful glass dome that let in daylight in the dining room, and I expected it to crash down on top of us, so I rushed under the table and waited. But miraculously, It didn't. And the gentleman I'd been serving, he calmly helped me up yet again, and he told me to make my way to the lifeboats. The lifeboats? Me? No such thing. I ran to the first class cabins so I could fetch as many life jackets as I could. Now, Louisa, Parry, and Hannah Owen, two of my best Holyhead girls, and they were doing the same. And we all ran downstairs and we directed some of the women and children up to the upper decks with life jackets on. But in all of the chaos, I somehow lost Louisa and Hannah in one of the cabins. I think, I don't know, they must have got trapped down there or something as I was helping the families up. And there was water sort of rushing everywhere. And I tried to find them, you know, shouted their names, Louisa, Hannah. But there was no answer, so I shouted to one of the lads. And he tried to shift the door, but the pressure of the water was too much and we had to run. We had to get up to the upper decks, so, oh, that's what I did. I had no choice.
Right, I'm just going to cut it short here and then stop the share. Julian, I hope you're there somewhere. I saw you there earlier.
I'm here.
Yeah, hello. I'm sorry, it's just a very short excerpt of a really interesting approach to the sinking of the Lannister. And one thing you were really keen to stress was the role of the female voice and the female experience. We think so often of the brave captains, but here's a brave woman on the sea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very, very interested in those brave captains and all the men that history talks about, and they're rightfully, you know, talked about. Occasionally, it may be that these great epic war stories, occasionally the female voice is really bubbling under the surface a bit, and so that's a really important part of my work for Ports Past and Present, is that I should investigate that female voice a little bit and how these epic war stories affected the women. And of course, with maritime history, there's the old adage, isn't there, that women and children are first off a sinking ship. And of course, Mary Coffey wasn't having any of that. She was going to be brave and courageous, just like her male colleagues. And she went down to the decks to collect life jackets and do what she could for everyone on board. It wasn't her response to run to the lifeboats.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in the way that you went about writing this piece of drama. You know, you obviously, you know, looked into sources and talked to people about this to try and understand how you approach this piece of, I suppose it's a piece of historical fiction in a way, isn't it? You know, how did you approach the creation of that?
I came to the Leinster through the brilliant Maritime Museum, and we've had Barry's presentation. This resource in Holyhead is so rich for our maritime storytelling, and I only really came to the Leinster through that, through the brilliant resources there, and I met the volunteers, and they pointed me really in the direction of the sort of best places to find this female voice angle, which is what I wanted to go with. So they pointed me to the Philip Lekain book, Torpedoed, which was brilliant. And then I happily entered a conversation with Philip Lekain, and he helped me a lot with, yes, the kind of historical facts. And then I used my skills as a dramatist to try and sort of empathise with Mary's experience according to those facts. So that was just an invaluable resource, along with the knowledge of people like Barry, Peter Scott, people with just amazing sort of encyclopedic knowledge of Holyhead's maritime history.
Thank you. I'm just aware of the time. I know some people are writing the chat. They've got to go. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to keep going. So we've got we're going to talk to Margaret as well after this. So if you can stay, please do. Just to jump on forward now, what's the kind of work you're planning to do for Ports Past and Present? Julian's frozen on my screen. I'm hoping she'll come back again in a minute.
Can you hear me?
you've frozen, but try again.
This in chat, me, that's great. So, maybe doing creative writing more.
You've gone very glitchy and it's stopped again.
Do you want to turn your camera off, Julian, and see if that helps?
Okay, can people hear me?
Yes, perfectly, yeah.
A little better.
Yeah, I like seeing you as well, but please talk, yes.
Fantastic. So there's a piece online at the moment which is for our younger sort of port residents, and that's a piece called The Mermaid's Purse, which is about ocean conservation and how we look after our coast. And of course, we need our young people to be mindful of that. So that's for them. There's a creative writing workshop attached to that, which is about found objects on the beach and how we might create stories about them. So obviously the Mermaid's Purse was about a fish egg. And then we're going to do a creative writing workshop with the community through Morn CF. That starts on the 14th of June, which is a well-being workshop. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how the sea helps us feel calmer when we're near it, and how creative writing can help us to do that too. And I'm working on a story, a poem called Evelyn on the Shore, which is about the Dutch stories about the Second World War. So that's a work in progress, and that's going to be on the website very soon.
Wonderful.
Yes, there's lots and lots of work in development, lots of work with the community, which is really important to me too.
Yeah, thank you. So with a number of our artists and writers, we've got on our website, if you look at Creative Connections, you'll find pages on each of our artists, and gradually we're putting up extra posts and links to more of their work on other parts of the website as well. So I'm going to have to cut it short there, but thank you so much for joining us, Julian, and we're so excited about your work and your contribution. So I'm hoping Margaret is around as well. Can you turn your camera on and say hello?
You see me? I'm here.
Iawn, hello, shwmae Margaret. Diolch am wneud ni. So we've already... Okay. We've already we've chatted a lot about the boats you've been making, and again, in particular on our website, the biggest collection of images you'll find is Margaret's writing. So we're just going to very quickly have a chat about that and the kind of work that you're making now. Shall we show these pictures, Margaret? Is that the best way?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, mae hynny'n fine, iawn.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to screen eto. It always comes up with an error message, which I just go cancel, and then it seems to work. Okay, iawn. So dyma ni. So these are the start of your process, I think. Yeah. Those
are the very first boats. They're called the fragile boats, Cychod Bregus, and they were inspired by the Brockta hoard that was found in Ireland, and they were the ones that set the scene for me in a way for the whole flotilla, because I really didn't want to do practical boats. That wasn't the approach. And a bit like Julian just said, that I did also, without knowing at the beginning, wanted to come from more of a female perspective, to look at things, look at this whole flotilla apart from as a sculptor, but in a sort of whole rounded way, a poetic way as well, with writing attached to it.
Maybe it'd be a good idea just to step back a minute and if you can just explain the concept behind the flotilla, which is what you're creating.
So it's a time-based flotilla. I actually wanted to look at the whole history of Holyhead and the whole history of this part of Northwest Wales, from the very, very beginning. And the Brockta hoard, so the boats at the beginning, they're the oldest boats that there are in existence. And so I wanted to start with the sort of Christian saints, what happened between Ireland and Wales and across the Irish Sea. I wanted to start with the way that we connected through not just trade, but at the very, very beginning through ideas. And I think that's where they come. It's they St. Cubby's boats, they're the beginning of the Christian saints and monks that came across, and the wealth of ideas they brought across from Ireland. And of course, there's so much evidence there. That's the one, that's the more of the coracle shape. And I wanted to bring in the two very early vessels, which is the currach and the coracle shape. So they've been done in a range of different materials, and the materials themselves come into the story as to actually why I did it the way I did. But so that's still Cubby. I got quite obsessed with these early vessels, the sort of the kind of fragility of them, the fact that some of them, of course, would not have been seafaring, the coracles wouldn't have been, but there are place names when you look at the map of around Holyhead, Caergybi, you will find that they have got references. There are little inlets with references to the coracle, place of coracles. I can't remember them offhand now. But also, of course, it gave the name to the port itself of Caergybi. So that's that's probably the starting off point, really, a long way around to doing it.
Yeah, okay. So this is a Cubby boat as well, I think, isn't it?
This is, if you turn it around the other way, or it doesn't matter. That's the currach. That's one of the currachs, and I actually based that one. It's on the currachs that I had a lot of experience of when I was over on the Aran Islands on Inisheer in Ireland, where they use them regularly. Of course, I've gone a very sculptural way of looking at this, and I've only got one set of oars there, whereas there would have been 6. But I was looking at it purely from a kind of from the form, from the shape, really. So the colours, the shapes, everything comes into the making of these small vessels. Okay. And then we're on to jumping a little bit, but if you follow the blog, you can see the sort of history and what informs it. We come into the to the time of the Viking boats, and that, of course, there was quite a lot of exchange in trade that went across with the Vikings, not just Ireland, but the rest of Europe. Some of these little vessels will carry cargo. They're quite elusive. I do explain it a little bit more. That one's just got the sail wrapped up there. But the Vikings brought with them an incredible sort of history of warfare, and it's almost as if there was only one side of looking at the Vikings, but I wanted to bring the poetic side of the Vikings. I wanted to bring in the fact that they were actually farmers, that they were also settled in, and there's plenty of evidence that they did settle in Anglesey. But also that there was a dark side to them, and there was a lot of exchange, not just in goods, but in people as well. So they were really important to bring them in.
Yeah, well, of course, yn Saesneg, dyn ni'n dweud Anglesey. Well, Anglesey is a Norse name, as is Skerry.
Of course, yes,
so,
yes.
So the fact that these Norse names have stayed with us for so long is a good example of that. So, so then moving on, this is the more industrial boats.
So we're jumping to the industrial time, and there's quite a few boats that come in between, but
yeah,
for the sake of this, yeah, so those are the sort of steamers really that went into and they were actually made by collecting found objects when I walked around Holyhead. Most of my work begins by walking, and then I will get either ideas from just walking and reflecting and drawing, or by collecting. As Julian was saying as well, that there's a wealth of natural found objects, but I particularly wanted to pick up images of the industrial age and to put them together in these. That was the earliest one was Prospero, which was the first telegram boat, and this one is a detail of the packet boat crossing the Irish Sea, and the drawing underneath, which is part of it, is an actual drawing which I made a little book of, which is of the currents, the actual Irish Sea currents.
That's right. There's a little concertina books you've made as well. Okay.
Yeah.
So there we are. We found the story doesn't necessarily always start with Henry VIII. Just before we finish, Margaret, do you just want to say a little bit about your plans going forward and what you're still hoping to create?
Yeah, if you come back onto the studio, you'll see behind me here, if you're able to.
Yeah, I'll just stop the share now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, can you see behind me up there? Yeah, so the scale of these, I'll just say very, very briefly, is very small.
Yeah, a little bit.
You see them here? They're really small. They go a little bit bigger, but I wanted to change the scale and I wanted to go really big. So on the back wall, you'll see just the ribs of one section of the Cubby Boat, which I'm working on with the community. So there's going to be 6 of those, not always circles. And the idea is to, it's already started. I've got the women from Holyhead and some from other parts that around Anglesey that are doing textile work, banners that are going to be hung inside those ribs, and it's made in 6 sections, and that I'm going to leave it to the community so they can install it wherever they choose to do it. But actually there's a lot of excitement now as people realize it's all going to be part of one haul, even though it's coming from knitting and crocheting and embroidery and quilting, and there's a wealth of talent out there which I want to bring into this, the work of the women particularly. Yeah.
So yes, so hopefully these boats will be visible in exhibitions in the future, hopefully at Geldra, maybe elsewhere. And we may be trying to look at other sites in Huggerby that we can show the work in the future. So we're going to round it up now. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Margaret, Julian, a phawb heddiw. Do you want to just finish off, Marianne? And
I'll just jump in here. Diolch, Martin, oedd hwnna mor ddiddorol. Just to say, the idea of found history is a deeply fascinating one, and both Julian and Margaret seem to have separately come to this through objects and through words and stories. And history isn't the straight narrative from A to B, and what survives, what comes through to us into the present, is often random and haphazard, and we create our own stories, our own histories out of what has managed to come through. And the way history survives is through people. It's through people telling each other about things that have happened, people showing each other objects that mattered to them. And I think today we've already seen, going right from the very geological coast to things picked up on a beach, a mermaid's purse, a little piece of plastic or rope. We've traced the whole span of time, and we've gone down so many different paths and so many different voices. So I can only say how incredibly grateful I am to everybody who contributed today. A ma hwn yn cynnwys chi hefyd y gynulleidfa, you the audience too, for being here and for sharing this with us. Hoffwn i just dweud, please, cadwch mewn cysylltiad. Write to us, email us, go on our website, write us some of the stories of the lost places or the named places that matter to you. Show us the objects that you have in your house or in your street that matter to you, that make Cubby Holyhead what it is. Just i weud diolch o galon unwaith eto to my wonderful, wonderful team on Ports Past and Present. It's such a pleasure working across the Irish Sea, as we shall continue to call it for the time being. Diolch o galon i chi, ac mwynhewch gweddill y diwrnod. Martin and I are just going to stay on screen here. We're going to stop recording now, Jonathan, if you could, that would be brilliant. Don't forget to fill in your feedback form, just to give us a little bit of an idea about how to progress forward with this.